With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So, in the context of the Treasury of Precious Qualities, we are presently in the final chapter where we are having a discussion of the paramitas, that which takes us beyond our ordinary narrow confusion. And within the paramitas, which famously are then generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, and meditation, and wisdom. We're done now on the last section, which is wisdom. And you have actually this famous line from Shantideva, where he says, whatever teachings that we have, whatever teachings the Buddha have given, are all for the purpose of wisdom. And the reason is that wisdom is what takes us out of our confusion. So wisdom is the, you can say, most important thing really that we're pursuing on the path. Of course, the entire path is designed so that there are ways in which this wisdom can manifest, what we call skillful means. But we have to have some idea of what we mean with wisdom. And it's really, without really having some idea of what we're doing in terms of wisdom, then everything else really becomes just, you could say, activities that are sort of disjointed or disassociated from the objective, which is this greater mind that's not entangled in the ordinary constructs. But the way that we penetrate to this condition requires that we have some means. And so we always talk about balancing skillful means and wisdom. But the means without the wisdom really just becomes then activities. And that's where we again and again emphasize the incredible value of the view, the understanding of what we're doing on the path. And if you look in the Jakob Leschly Rinpoche's life story that was translated by Padmakara, in the back of it, there's an appendix called the Lion's Roar. And in there, Mipo Rinpoche says something about the importance of having some clarity about what we're doing on the path. So we're presently, in terms of wisdom, we're talking about the wisdom of hearing the teaching, reflecting on the teaching, thinking about it critically, and then engaging this through what we call the wisdom of meditation. And that's actually where we've arrived at now. But Mipo just says something about this place that we'd be at when we've studied the teachings and we verified that it's what we understand is something that we can directly understand, directly perceive, or understand through reasoning, and also through listening to what the Buddha or the sages that we trust, they have to say. But that's where he says about this wisdom, which we might think, oh, wisdom, I could never do that. That's impossible. He says, ordinary beings are able to cut through their misconceptions by means of study and reflection, and thanks to the three types of valid cognition. And what he means here, thanks to the three types of valid cognition, that is what we can directly observe. And here we're not limited to the material. We're also talking about what we can directly observe, what's happening with our mind. So that's where we talk about, you could say, a degree of empiricism. Normally in materialist science, we talk about what is empirical is what we can see with the senses. But in the Buddhist context, we include mind as knowing what's happening, because we do know what's happening in our mind. So it's what we can verify. So that's where the first type of valid cognition is what we call the direct perception. And then there's what we can understand through reasoning. We might not, for example, be able to see impermanence right now, but we know impermanence is a fact through our reasoning. And then also through the statements from great beings like the Buddha or the sages, Longchenpa, Jigme Lingpa, and so on. So that's where we have some ways of validating things, our knowledge. And with that, then, on the basis of study, reflection, and these kind of valid cognition, he says ordinary beings are able to ascertain the points that should be assimilated, meaning the wisdom that's to be understood. And it's thanks to this that they acquire irreversible conviction. If, on the other hand, they fail to ascertain through valid cognition the truth of their position for themselves, and they are unable to prove it to those who contest it, they're like those who, though unsure about the presence of an invisible flesh-eating spirit, proclaim that it is there in front of them. And that's where you might sometimes have people who either intentionally or for some reason choose to pretend that they can see or know something. And that's where they're not going to convince anybody. Or rather, they might have difficulty convincing others if it's something that can't be seen. I mean, we've had this in our culture when we had those that proclaim a particular spiritual or religious phenomenon, and we say, well, that's very nice, but where's the proof? So that's where we would want to be clear that for us to be able to have certainty for ourselves and also to communicate this to others, there has to be a clear way in which we have certainty on the basis of logic and on the basis of our experience. So otherwise, we are, as it says here, then we're unable to convince either themselves or anyone else. Therefore, the learned should adopt a procedure of speaking in a way that accords with reason. And that's also where we as Buddhists, if we just sort of say, well, the Lama is just wonderful and whatever the Lama says is just so true, then yeah, that's nice, but it's not going to make sense to our family. It's not going to make sense to our friends. And they'll just think we're off with the fairies and are on some spiritual trip. And that's why we have to have the language that concords with how people assert what is valid, what is true. So we have to have clear understanding for ourselves, and that once we have clarity for ourselves, then we can easily be able to speak about it to others. There's the famous physicist Richard Feynman who says, if you can't explain something to an undergraduate, you haven't understood it yourself. So that's where we need to have this certainty on the basis of hearing the teaching and reflecting on it critically. So if their position, meaning those who then practice, if their position is logically established, their supporters will be filled with irreversible enthusiasm, and the tongues of the dissenters will be cut short. By contrast, when a path is not established by reason, then no matter how much it's decorated by all manner of assertions, a host of doubts will proliferate like water welling up from a spring. So if we're just there saying, oh, I just love the Dharma and, I love all these interesting things about karma and samsara and nirvana, and it's so profound. And and even if we begin to say, oh, it's been part of a culture that's remarkable, then it just won't. It'll last a little bit, but it won't last for very long. That's where we won't really have anybody on our side. So that's where this ascertainment of the view, the understanding of wisdom, what we mean with it, has to be established on the basis of listening to what the Buddha has to say, what the sages have to say about it, and then thinking critically, aligning it with our experience. So coming back then to the text, we've reached then stanza 152. And here in the root text, Jigme Lingpa then writes, And so, upon the basis of reflection, one comes to the conviction that phenomena are unoriginate. To recognize their nature and to rest in it is known as wisdom that results from meditation. So here we are establishing what we have been doing so far in terms of establishing phenomena as dependently arisen, that phenomena exist on the basis of being not unconditionally solid, existing the way that we, in our confusion, attribute solidity to both what we perceive externally and also in terms of what we experience as ourselves. Once we understand the fluctuating, continually shifting, and ultimately dependently arisen phenomena, then we understand that the whole nature of our reality is such that it's not something that can be grasped as something that exists in terms of something, what we could call an ontological absolute. Our nature is, our reality is simply not like that. And that's where we talk about that phenomena, the way that we perceive them, have actually never really, they just don't exist in these ways that we attribute solidity to. And that's where we say they are unborn or unoriginate. So here then, Kangyur Rinpoche in his commentary says, as we have already explained, perfect wisdom arising from reflection creates the conviction that the three types of phenomena associated with samsara, nirvana, and the path are unoriginated, meaning empty. And such a conviction gives rise to an unmistaken knowledge of the fundamental nature of things. So this insight is not something that we were taught in school. It's not something that's obvious, but it is what we arrive at if we investigate phenomena. And that's where we're talking about that phenomena actually can't function. If they existed as solid, nothing could ever move. Everything would just stay. It's thanks to phenomena not being anything other than dependent arising phenomena, in that there just exists everything that we can observe, both internally and externally, operate on the basis of causes and conditions. And so that's where there is nothing that can function if it was solid. And that then means that phenomena being not existing, truly existing, and then that also applies to everything we're doing in terms of the path. So it's thanks to us not being stuck in one way that we can unstick ourselves. And that's what we mean with the path. So we're not stuck in samsara. We can unstick ourselves from samsara and achieve awakening. So that's why what we call samsara, nirvana, and the path, they are, by their very nature, they are unborn or empty. It doesn't mean that there's nothing there, but it simply means that they function on the basis of causes and conditions, and hence are not objects of the grasping mind. So he then says, settling the mind, unspoiled by dualistic cogitation, in this ultimate reality calls forth the wisdom that results from meditation. This is the message of the extraordinary sutras and their commentaries as set forth by valid authorities. So we need to assert it in terms of our own experience, but also our own reasoning. But also this is what the sutras talk about. This is what the Buddha is trying to tell us, what the sages are trying to tell us. Now, there's an important point that's being made here when it comes then to us beginning to practice this. Then it says, settling the mind, unspoiled by dualistic cogitation. And that's where we're referring to a particular way in which we actually practice meditation, in a way we actually cultivate the wisdom of meditation. In some traditions, they would say, oh, you always have to keep analyzing. And particularly in the Nyingma and the Kagyu tradition, we much more emphasize this quality that is not contaminated by conceptual thought, because analysis, it can help us to understand what is the nature of phenomena, but to keep thinking, it is dependently arisen, it is empty. To keep thinking that is just going to be thought. So we're still just that's not the wisdom of meditation. That's how we arrive at understanding the nature of phenomena. But the way that we then engage this is by settling the mind free from dualistic cogitation. That's where, of course, we need to have meditation instruction from an authentic teacher. But when we have that, then we need to let go of the mind that keeps thinking about philosophy, thinking about analysis, thinking about emptiness, and so on. On the other hand, if we get this sort of introduction to the nature of mind without having actually established the view, then this nature of mind introduction could very easily just become a form of shamatha. Then we might have some sort of introduction to some intuition, insight into a place in the mind that's not contaminated by confusion. But if we still think in terms of a solidly existing world out there, and we still think in terms of a solidly existing self, then all this so-called resting in the nature of mind does is really just provide a condition of shamatha. And then maybe while we're meditating, we feel good. But then when we engage with the world, then we just feel that we're us against the world, and we're still perpetuating duality. So that's where it's very important that our meditation is not based on you could say, just settling and thinking, and it has to have this certainty as we practice the path. So particularly then addressing this issue where we would say where some would say, oh, you need to always, unless you keep analyzing, then the mind is just going to remain ordinary. That's where Jigme Lingpa and the Nyingmapas and the Kagyupas, they have something to say about this. So Kangyur Rinpoche, commenting on this, he says, some people object that if a sharp analyzing intellect is not operative at all times in the main meditation, and if there is not a certain apprehension of and intellectual conviction in the absence of the personal and phenomenal self, the all-discerning wisdom, which is the nature of vipassana, cannot occur. Now keep in mind, he's talking about meditation itself. He's not talking about establishing the view. He's not talking about the wisdom that comes from hearing and reflecting. That definitely is about intellectual conviction. That is about analyzing. But once we come to the actual experiential integration, on the basis of that knowledge that we have from the wisdom of hearing and reflecting, then there has to be a settling which is not intellectual. And that's where he says, that's where some would say, oh, you have to always have this. Unless you have this analyzing mind, you won't have the proper vipassana. And Jürgen Gyatso says, but if this were true, it would imply that an analyzing intellect must also be present in the meditation of the Aryas, and even at the level of Buddhahood. For those who make this objection say that without it, there can be no wisdom of vipassana. So the implication here is if you'd have to be thinking while you're meditating, then that would also be the way in which the great bodhisattvas would be meditating, just sitting there philosophizing or analyzing. In answer, it may be argued that this does not necessarily follow, since in the context of the present objection, the meditators are ordinary beings and not like Aryas, who have vipassana due to their direct seeing of the ultimate reality. So some might say, oh, yeah, it's only at a certain level that you can leave the mind. Our answer to this is, says Jürgen Gyatso, is that even if there is a certain distinction according to a given situation, the mind must be attuned to the wisdom that sees the ultimate directly, and it must remain in that state. For a mind caught in ontological extremes cannot bring forth the wisdom that transcends these extremes. And what he means with ontological extremes is essentially intellectual positions, that we have a philosophy. So then when we're meditating, we're sitting there and abiding by our philosophy. And that's never going to bring wisdom. So that applies even if it is an ordinary individual who's not necessarily a sublime being, not necessarily an Arya or a Bodhisattva. It applies that even at you could say the level of an ordinary being, there has to be this mind that is attuned to wisdom, that sees wisdom directly. So that's particularly also very prominent in the teachings of Mahamudra and the Great Perfection. So here we have then the wisdom that in the section of wisdom resulting from meditation. Now we come to a discussion on wisdom itself. So here Jigme Lingpa says, what is happening here? Oh, we're towards the end here. The ultimate expanse, immaculate, pure space, is of a single taste with meditation's object. Here, there is no place for form or other aggregates, and also the 8 consciousnesses, there's indeed no trace. To say there's nothing there, thus mentally refuting them, is utterly at variance with wisdom in itself. The ultimate expanse is not mere nothingness. It is a treasure of all wisdoms and enlightened bodies. So in this condition here, when we talk about meditation, we have the ultimate expanse, meaning the condition of the mind that's not confused, and the expanse of the nature of reality. And these we talk about wisdom and the nature of reality as not two different things. And in there's no notion of the skandhas, no notion of the experience of the consciousnesses. And it's also not a state in which we just say there's nothing there. Otherwise, we would look at the Buddhas and they would just be completely blah. There wouldn't be the qualities that we associate with an awake being. Compassion, strength, wisdom, particularly. So Kangyur Rinpoche then comments, just like space, ungraspable, impossible to indicate, formless, and without center or circumference, even so is the nature of the mind. When one rests in the primordially pure Dhammadhatu, the object of meditation, object reality, and the subject, meaning wisdom, you could say the subjective dimension, are of one taste. Within the fundamental nature of the mind, which cannot be characterized as this or that, there is no such thing as 5 aggregates, meaning the way that we ordinarily experience ourselves is according to the experience of the body and the mind. And these are understood in terms of what we call the 5 aggregates. And given that the mind's nature is uncompounded, in that it's not something that comes into existence, abides for some time, and then disappears, even the 8 consciousnesses are absent. The 8 consciousnesses, that's all about the passing things that we perceive. So we would say the 8 consciousnesses, they're conditioned, they're compounded, but the mind's nature is not like that. The Prasangika Madhyamikas teach that there is no origination of the kind described by any of the 4 possible theories, meaning existence, non-existence, both, or neither. But one should not conclude from this that once the extreme of existence has been refuted, there is a non-existent to be meditated upon as something newly established. And that's where you might think, oh, emptiness, that's some sort of state that's just there as the foundation of everything. What we're simply talking about is an absence, the absence of right now the snow here is melting. The absence of snow is not some sort of like particular condition. It's just that there's no snow. So here we're talking about the conceptual extremes that keep us held in confusion, when they're absent, that's good. But it's not as if all of a sudden we have some new thing that is the absence of confusion or the extremes. So that's where when in eliminating this confusion and these particular what we call ontological extremes, existence, non-existence, and so forth, when we eliminate these, it's not as if we arrive at some emptiness. So that's where simply just asserting that there's nothing there doesn't become a thing in itself. So he says, for non-existence is not the fundamental nature of things. Indeed, it is incompatible with the wisdom that knows this nature. So the wisdom is not known as a thing, and is not as some condition of there is nothing there. The nature of the mind abides within the three doors of liberation. It is not a bare non-entity. And what do we say? We say it's emptiness free from characteristics and not something that's brought about through wishful thinking or something that we wish for. We say emptiness, characteristiclessness, and wishlessness. So that's how the nature of mind abides. But it doesn't mean that there's a condition of nothing. It is not a bare non-entity. It is the source of all the kayas and wisdoms of the Tathagatas, and is indeed like a treasure house. So that's where we see all the qualities of awakening that manifest in an awakened individual. And again, here we're fortunate to be within a living tradition of individuals that manifest these qualities. And that's where if we were just sitting at a university or if we were just sitting reading books, then it would be very speculative. And we might think, oh, this enlightenment, it's going to be like nothing there. And that's where we just need to look at the great teachers that we have. And that's where we can see awakening comes with manifest qualities, just like we ourselves. When we're not, you can say, hampered by paranoia or insecurity or aggression or jealousy or whatever we know when we're sort of held by a toxic condition, then we're actually wonderful people. We're nice people. We have lots of wonderful qualities that manifest. So we would say this condition of absence of confusion, the condition of wisdom, is like a treasure house. So Jigme Lingpa says then, perfectly one watches perfect purity, which is the spotless nature in itself. But to watch is just a metaphor. Not to wander from this is the best of meditations. For in the presence of such primal wisdom, there is no place for intellect and mental fabrication. When wisdom such as this is well and truly known, it is by skillful means that liberation comes. But if there is no wisdom, skillful means will bring us no freedom from our fetters. So that's where we sometimes, in the pith instructions, we would hear that we sometimes in the Great Perfection pith instructions here, there's nothing to meditate on, and yet one should not wander from such meditation or such non-meditation. And it's essential that, again, that this wisdom is enhanced with the skillful means. But again, if we don't have this wisdom, the skillful means will not be a means to set us free. Now, in terms of the teachers, as I have heard it, we would say they would say that even if we might not have recognition of the nature of the mind, to engage in all the various practices, of course, sows the seed. So it's not entirely wasted. We might not have perfect wisdom, but again, engaging in the path lays down particular patterns, virtuous patterns that are of tremendous benefit. But in terms of the wisdom, and here, of course, this is the culmination of the sutra vehicle that we're discussing here, the wisdom. So we're you could say touching on the highest degree of insight. And that's where, speaking from that perspective, we then emphasize how it is absolutely indispensable. This is what constitutes really the practice of sublime beings. It says here, to be sure, only superior beings or Aryas see ultimate reality directly as it is. But even on the level of ordinary beings, the mind, when left unaltered by mental fabrications, is able to watch the perfectly pure and ultimate nature of phenomena. Such a state of mind is the wisdom of vipassana. It is quite different from the absorption of the insensate gods. Neither is it a kind of somnolence, nor a deprivation of the faculty of vision, as in the case of someone born blind. So we are saying here that, of course, the direct realization of this wisdom nature, that's the scope of the Aryas. That's at the level of what we call the path of seeing. But even ordinary beings that are then still on the levels of the path of accumulation and the path of joining, even they could leave the mind as it is in its unfabricated natural condition, and that would constitute the wisdom of vipassana. And that kind of remaining in the nature is not a condition of stopping thoughts or being in some state, a zone where you're absorbed, or some state where there's no experience, like a sensory deprivation, or not perceiving things. Kangyur Rinpoche says, of course, the expression to watch is just a metaphor. If one does not stir from the state of the uncontrived nature, in the sense of being distracted elsewhere or are purposefully meditating, one is in fact meditating on the natural condition of things as it is. So that's where we're encouraged. There's an encouragement here, and talking about watching simply just means to not be caught up in delusion. So there's nothing to watch. There's no difference between the watcher and that which is seen. But so that's where the watching is not as we ordinarily will think of looking at an object, but it is a condition of also being non-deluded, not being distracted. He says this is why this kind of meditation is superior to any other. The primordial wisdom present in such meditation is without the split between subject and object, someone that watches something. That kind of split is not there. It is free from discursive thinking with its main mind and mental factors as their object. So again, we're not talking about some particular state of mind. This wisdom is indeed the all-discerning wisdom. When the mind attains to such a wisdom and phenomena, when the mind attains to such a wisdom and phenomena are known to be neither existent nor non-existent, liberation will come by virtue of bodhicitta and the skillful methods of generosity and the rest. On the other hand, endeavoring in skillful means while lacking this wisdom and continuing to apprehend phenomena as truly existent is to be no different from non-Buddhist practitioners who are unable to free the mind from the fetters of samsara. So that's where it's so important that we engage the path with an understanding of what it is what are we doing on the path in terms of, it's about eliminating confusion, not joining a church where we're doing all sorts of wonderful, esoteric, colorful, groovy things, but that whatever skillful means there might be, they're entirely about bringing forth a realization of this wisdom nature, this absence of the confusion, this absence of the cause of samsara. So, okay. So then progress on the path and the attainments of the result. So this is now a new heading then in terms of still within the wisdom chapter. It says here, 157, those who cultivate within their minds emptiness and great compassion pursue the great path of accumulation until the supreme mundane level on the path of joining. Emptiness occurs in meditation and compassion afterwards. So while we're practicing then this settling in a condition of primordial wisdom, that's the scope while we're meditating. Of course, in post-meditation, then we're continually engaging with the world on the basis of a duality, a notion of self and other. He says, those who gather the two accumulations through meditation on emptiness in formal sessions and through the practice of great compassion in post-meditation, first through conscious application and then through gradual habituation, meaning that we generate it and then it becomes part of who we are. So that's where those who engage in such a path, that's where we would say the entire Mahayana path is really determined or defined in terms of these two accumulations, the accumulation of merit and accumulation of wisdom. And that's where then on that path, those who engage in this kind of meditation on emptiness in meditation sessions, compassion and post-meditation, he says they are on the small, medium, and great path of accumulation. So the first of the 5 paths, the path of accumulation, is then divided into the small, medium, and greater path. That then takes us to the path of joining. And that says the path of joining is what links practitioners swiftly to the path of seeing and has 4 stages: warmth, peak, acceptance, and supreme mundane level. I think, yeah. In each of these 4 stages, both in meditation and post-meditation, emptiness and compassion manifest naturally. So this is again something where we're not importing something new into our being. We're simply aligning ourselves with the absence of confusion, and that's where the exercise in terms of both compassion and wisdom, emptiness and compassion, these are natural to us. They will become something that is naturally that when we're bringing them forth. It's not an addition to who we are. It's simply just connecting with the natural purity of our disposition. So these then manifest naturally. So 158. But when the path of seeing is attained, emptiness, compassion, both unite inseparably. And on the first ground, that of perfect joy, the truth of suchness is perceived directly. So when the path of seeing is attained, and that's the third of the 5 paths, the wisdom of emptiness is united with compassion. Emptiness experienced in meditation and compassion felt during the post-meditation are not different experiences. Emptiness and compassion manifest co-emergently and inseparably. While resting in the meditation on emptiness, the mind is saturated with great compassion. In post-meditation, while training in the bodhisattva activities of generosity and so forth, meaning the paramitas, everything is conditioned by the wisdom of emptiness of the 3 spheres, meaning when we're practicing generosity, patience, whatever it might be, we want to do that. And particularly then at the path of seeing, these are practiced without the notion that, oh, I am being very generous to so-and-so by doing this. These, what we call 3 spheres of subject, object, and action, are absent. And that's why the Bodhisattva wouldn't go around thinking, I am, Mrs. Wonderful or Mr. Wonderful. There's not that notion of subject, that does something wonderful and an object that's the recipient of something. So that's where the three spheres are absent. And that's where someone practicing the Bodhisattva path of generosity is beautiful, because they're not thinking, gosh, I'm so generous, or I'm so disciplined, or I'm so patient. So it's very lighthearted. It's very beautiful. So on the first ground, named perfect joy, the practitioner gains the perfect, pure, unclouded eyes of Dharma and beholds directly the true ultimate nature of phenomena. So this is then the first bhumi, the path of seeing. It's known as great joy, in that there's no longer the confusion that one has been bound by, and no longer the entanglement, and say the great problematic of ego. So 159 then says, later, on the noble path of meditation, at the 10th ground's final point, concentration diamond-like destroys the veils of thought. Enlightenment stands manifest. Later, on the noble path of meditation, that is, on the 7 impure grounds, skillful means and wisdom are combined, even though there is still a distinction between the practice of meditation and post-meditation. So that's where, for the Bodhisattvas that then are on the path of meditation, there is this is the fourth path. There is still some distinction while they're meditating and then post-meditation. However, the pure grounds are reached, meaning the 8th bhumi onwards, the 8th ground, the 8th bodhisattva ground onwards, when the pure grounds are reached, and due to a concentration on emptiness endowed with supreme aspects, the yogi gradually attains the perfectly pure expanse and all the inconceivable qualities of the Tathagatas. So on the 8th bhumi onwards, then everything is perceived in terms of its purity. So that's why we would say there's an understanding of emptiness, and there's also an understanding of how this emptiness nature is endowed with luminous quality, and everything that is perceived by the bodhisattva is seen in terms of its intrinsic purity. The world is seen in terms of pure, and the individuals themselves and others are understood in terms of their intrinsic purity. And this, of course, is reminiscent, or you could say, what we are actually aspiring to in the development stage practice, where we train ourselves as yogis to see the purity. While we don't see it, what we are in fact doing is asserting the reality and the experience of the 8th bhumi bodhisattvas, where then phenomena as they appear are understood in terms of the unity of appearance and emptiness, and in terms of their freedom from obscuration. So that's where then the yogi at the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumi then abide in this condition of perfect purity. So it says, by these means and following the non-conceptual path that is free from effort and activity, the yogi spontaneously accomplish the 2 aims of self and other. Here, meditation and post-meditation are indistinguishable. So such an individual, they are continually benefiting both themselves and others. So that's what we mean, accomplishing the 2 aims of self and others. 160. And then there is no moment. And then there is no moment when the mind is not at rest in even meditation. 18 distinctive qualities of the victorious ones, the 10 strengths, and 4 fearless states. All of them are actualized, and one is Buddha. So that comes within a summary then of the 6 paramitas. All the Buddhas of the 3 times, those who have come in the past, those who appear at the present time, and those who will come in the future, while on the path of learning, listen to scriptures that set forth the 6 paramitas. They reflect upon their meaning and train in them on their paths. As their view exceeds all conceptual extremes in the final stages of their training, their practice of the path is unlimited, and their exercise of the 6 paramitas is utterly devoid of all self-regard. Sorry, this was 160. I was a little bit ahead of myself here. Sorry. Okay, we better stick to what we just read. I'll just read it again, just so it's clear. And then this is then where those who abide on what we call the pure bhumis, then the purity of phenomenon is then manifest, and then it goes on to say, and then there is no moment when the mind is not at rest in even meditation. 18 distinctive qualities of the victorious ones, the 10 strengths and 4 fearless states, all of them are actualized, and one is Buddha. And that's where it then says, when at the end of the 10th ground, the 10th bhumi, the path of meditation is perfected, the diamond-like concentration overwhelms even the subtlest cognitive obscurations, annihilating them without a trace, while on the path of no more learning, total and perfect enlightenment is attained. So samyaksam buddhi. And that's also where we, at this point, until then, I think this came up in some discussion, until this very point, the very point of still being on the path of learning, when this transitions into the path of no more learning, it's only then that this notion of I and other is ultimately eliminated. From then on, there's no notion of somebody doing something, for example, working for sentient beings. I am doing something for sentient beings. And in general, this subtle distinction between self and other, at this point, is then eliminated. This is the most subtlest cognitive obscuration, Ninang, or this perception of duality. So it says, at this point, there is no moment when the mind is not resting in meditation. The 21 sections of the stainless qualities of omniscient wisdom are actualized. The 18 distinct qualities of the conquerors, the 10 strengths, and the 4 fearlessnesses, and so forth. All these are then again what we would refer to as the treasury of enlightenment, then become fully manifest. And this is then what we define as Buddhahood. This is why we venerate the Buddha. This is because the Buddha possesses all these qualities, and not as something that is accumulated or developed, but unveiled as being intrinsic. And why we, for example, would respect the Buddha and appreciate these qualities is because then they resonate with qualities that we possess ourselves. So that's why we don't view the Buddha as somebody weird. But we would simply just rejoice in seeing these manifest qualities of awakening. So that's then the culmination of the entire path. And that's then what is referred to as the path of no more learning. At that point, there's no more path. And the individual has crossed the ocean. And at that point, then the raft, the vessel that was used, is no more required. So that is then the end of the journey. So then here, then there is the concluding summary of the 6 paramitas. It's thus that all the 6 perfections are the broad highway of all the conquerors, unmistaken in their view and in their deeds most pure. To Akanishta, unexcelled, they make their way. So Akanishta is then a term for, you could say, the highest point, the abiding purity of all phenomena, the abiding condition, and also that which is unveiled and reached through enlightenment. And so we sometimes refer to Akanishta as a pure realm. The pure realm of Akanishta, Gandhavuya Akanishta, and so on, is referred to this condition where there's no longer any confusion. So we sometimes refer to this as a Buddha field or the highest Buddha field, simply just meaning the place in which the abiding nature of phenomena has become manifest. So Kangyur Rinpoche then comments here, says, all the Buddhas of the three times, those who have come in the past, those who appear at the present time, and those who will come in the future, when on the path of learning, listen to scriptures that set forth the six paramitas. They reflect on their meaning and train in them on the path. As their view exceeds all conceptual extremes in the final stages of their training, their practice of the path is unlimited, and their exercise of the six paramitas is utterly pure, meaning devoid of self-regard. There's no longer this notion of self undertaking something. In this way, they bring the two accumulations to perfection and depart for the realm of Akanishta, adorned with the five certainties, meaning this is the condition in which the awakened one, the teacher, the teaching, the assembly, the time and the place, all of these are naturally perfect. If we were to then give it a name, there they attain perfect enlightenment and accomplish the two kayas. So this in the Mahayana we would refer to, that is where enlightenment actually takes place in terms of the conditions and the circumstances for awakening. So if you, for example, read Dudra Rinpoche's history of the Nyingma teachings, then it refers to how the Buddha, while the Buddha's Nirmanakaya was manifest in Bodh Gaya, and we talk about the Buddha attaining enlightenment under the tree and so forth, that's sort of the outer way of understanding it. But on the inner level, what was taking place in terms of this awakening is then a place in which the absence of confusion is manifest in terms of complete purity. And that's where we then refer to this in terms of the Akanishta, the realm of Akanishta, and adorned with the five certainties. So here then, with such an enlightenment, there's the accomplishment of the two kayas, which is the what we would call the accomplishment of awakening, and also which is the Dhammakaya, and also the Rupakaya, which is then the kaya of manifesting for the benefit of others, sentient beings. This then concludes our discussion of the expository vehicle of causality, as understood in the traditions of the profound view and vast activities. So this then constitutes volume 1 of the Treasury of Precious Qualities, and this is then the text that expounds then the stages of the sutra path. We've concluded this this one, the first out of the two, and it is then the teaching that has covered all what we call the sutra vehicle, or the vehicle, the dialectical vehicle, or the vehicle that speaks in terms of providing the causes and conditions for achieving awakening. And so this very much is the vehicle that operates with our ordinary dualistic mind, which we humbly have to acknowledge. And as such, then the sutra teachings is very often referred to in terms of being the dialectical vehicle, the vehicle that takes, you could say, a rational understanding of cause and effect as, you could say, the means for the awakening, the path. And we generally understand these, as we have it in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, we understand this in terms of the two vehicles of the sutra teachings that come from Nagarjuna and that come from Asanga, or we would say from Manjushri and from Maitreya, the profound viewed lineage from Manjushri and Nagarjuna, and the vast activity tradition that comes from Maitreya and Asanga. And these are then also associated with the traditions of Madhyamaka and Yogacara. So these we would like to think in terms of, you could say, these two lineages as collaborating and constituting then the Mahayana teachings, the Mahayana Sutra teachings. So here we are, we've concluded this, the study of the Treasury of Precious Qualities. So this is really wonderful. And thank you all for participating in this. It's hopefully useful. Me playing the role of somebody who sits and reads up this text and sort of throws in a bit of commentary provides an incredible opportunity for myself. So I'm very grateful to you for being there and providing the conditions for this study. And hopefully it's also been useful in terms of your own practice. And again, everything I'm doing here is very much about simply bringing us to study. I think it's very difficult for us to practice the Buddha's path without actually engaging in understanding what constitutes the view, what constitutes the path. So I think this is something that's quite helpful. The recordings will stay online, yeah. For as long as Dropbox continues, I have no intention of removing it. Yeah. Okay. All the very best for practice. I think we'll probably continue doing some Dharma study. So I think we might be back. I'll see what I was thinking of. I've had a few ideas, but anyway, we'll let you know. So please stay on our mailing list, stick around, do remain Buddhist, do remain on the path. Please stay in the Sangha. And yeah, thank you very much. Take care.